Let's move on. Simon Frost, please. Simon Frost.
Is Typhoon Haiyan further evidence of mankind creating climate change? And if so, what can we do to reduce the risk of further disasters?
Is Typhoon Haiyan further evidence of mankind creating climate change? And if so, what can we do to reduce the risk of further disasters? Nigel Lawson.
No, there is no connection at all between this typhoon and climate change. If you look at tropical storms, you will find there has been no increase in the amount or the strength of tropical storms for the past 100 years. And indeed, this year, Typhoon Haiyan is terrible, absolutely appalling. But these things, I'm afraid, happen in the tropics. In the Atlantic hurricane season, this year has been one of the quietest hurricane seasons in the Atlantic within living memory. It is the quietest, the least, although they predicted there'd be more, for 30 years or more. And if you look at what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says, which is recognised as an authority on this, they say there is absolutely no connection between so-called climate change and tropical storms or tropical of all kinds. This is, I'm afraid, a scare which people latch onto, but there is absolutely no scientific merit in it. There is no statistical merit in it. There has been no increase in extreme weather events at all, and this is fact.
Ed Davey, you agree?
Well, I'm glad to see that Lord Lawson now is praying the IPCC in aid. He doesn't normally do that. But on the question, I think he's actually right that there is no evidence that climate change is increasing the frequency of tropical storms. What there is evidence is it's increasing the impact of the intensity of those storms. And this is how it's doing it. Sea levels are rising. That's a fact, and I hope Nigel Lawson will agree. And that's happening because of climate change, because the ice caps are melting, the glaciers are melting. That means that with higher sea levels, islands like they have in the Philippines archipelago and low-lying coastal areas are far more vulnerable to these storms than they ever used to be. And that's the real danger of climate change. It isn't always that it's increasing extreme weather events, although the IPCC says in some cases they think it is, but it's making these areas far more vulnerable. And that's why these disasters are on a scale we've never seen before. So we have to take climate change extremely seriously. This country, we have to lead by making sure we are taking the measures, whether it's investing in renewables or low carbon or energy efficiency. But we have to lead in the world. Next week, I'm going to the Global Climate Change Talks in Warsaw. We're preparing to sign, hopefully, work to sign a global deal in 2015. The world has got to take action. All the evidence says it's more urgent than ever before, and I hope Nigel, when he looks at the evidence now that's coming out from the IPCC, which is now quoting in favour, doesn't normally, I hope he will now actually realise that the world has to take action on climate change.
Nicky King, where do you stand on this?
Isn't this all so confusing? 1 minute I'm told I've got to save my rubbish, and the next minute I'm told it all goes into the same landfill site. 1 minute I'm being told that if we don't save the planet, it's going to die in 20 years, and somebody else says, no, this is just the natural life of a planet. I wish there was somebody who would tell me exactly what's going on, and then I could make a decision. It is so, so difficult. So I find it very confusing. I have to say, you know, I'm in the truck business. I think you'll probably agree that the motor industry probably is the industry that has been terrifically done an awful lot for climate change. We're now in the unique position that if one of
done an awful lot for climate change.
Sorry, an awful lot. We've cleaned its own act up enormously. I mean, we're now in the position that one of my trucks parked in Calcutta, the air coming out of the exhaust pipe will be cleaner than the air going in. But when I look round, if you look round Calcutta, you'll see thousands and thousands of vehicles that are 10 years old, 15-year-olds, 20-year-olds, pouring God knows what into. I'm not quite sure what this little Europe can do when there is so much of the rest of the world that needs to come up to speed.
OK. Stella Creasy.
I mean, Nigel, I hope you will take up the offer made by the Filipino delegate to the climate change conference. I don't know if people saw today his impassioned speech. It made a lot of people cry about his view that there was a connection. I actually take the scientific evidence on that, but let's look at the scientific evidence that shows that there is a 95% chance that climate change is man-made. Now, absolutely, that means there is a 5% chance that it is not, and it's right that we have a public policy debate about how do we deal with that kind of risk ratio. My sense is that 95% is a pretty good standard to start thinking about what we can do to address that, because that gentleman was talking about trying to take dead relatives out of the rubble of the buildings and trying to deal with the consequences of this. We are not immune to our own responsibilities about the things that we can do to create a more sustainable way of living. And I don't want to take the risk that we might be in that 5% when the 95% evidence, and it is independent scientific evidence, Nikki. I'm afraid sometimes when I hear you talk, Nigel, I hear it's where opinion meets fact. And the fact is that climate change is happening. We have to find ways to address it. We can have different debates about how we address it, but the idea that we can ignore it, that we can somehow make it go away, well, I say, just go and talk to those people in the Philippines. I think you'll hear a very different story.
I think you're very confused, if I may say so. First of all, where there's no scientific connection, and this is accepted by the IPCC and accepted by the great majority of scientists, is between global warming and the hurricanes and typhoons, including this terrible one in the Philippines, which of course is particularly bad. Well, that's what the question was about.
No, I didn't say that.
As for the 95%, what they are saying is that they are 95% certain that the amount of global warming that there has been is largely due to carbon emissions. Now, but in fact, there's been very little global warming. There's been none at all over the past 15 years.
What I mean?
This is a fact. You go to the Met Office, they admit this. Everybody who knows anything about it admits this. The amount of global warming is very little.
Ed,
Now,
hang on. Ed, what do you say to that exact point?
Every decade in the last 3 decades, it's been getting warmer.
What's happened over the last 15
This year
years?
is going to be the 7th warmest on record. And it's not just global temperatures, it's temperatures in the oceans. And it's not just temperatures, it's the ice caps that are melting. It's not just the ice caps that are melting, it's the sea levels. It's not just the sea levels, it's the acidity in the sea. There is a huge, overwhelming evidence that climate change is happening. And don't believe me as a politician, believe the scientists.
Yeah.
The IPCC had 259 scientists from 39 countries. They had 50,000 comments for peer review. It was the most peer-reviewed piece of science in human history. So don't believe politicians.
Sorry,
I think what Nigel Lawson
is confused.
Hold on, I
confused.
think that what Nigel Lawson challenged you with was that there'd been no change over the past 15 years.
And I disagree.
Is that true or not?
No, there has been it's been slowing down.
No, it's been flat.
It's not flat. It is not flat.
It doesn't take very much change to see the rise in sea levels that we're seeing.
When we're talking about climate change, we're actually talking about long periods.
So
what the Global Warming Foundation, which Nigel Lawson chairs, which is trying to undermine the scientific consensus on climate change, they take this 15 years, and because the climate change, the increase in global temperatures has been slowing down, they say climate change isn't happening. But when you ask the scientists, they say, well, over a short period of time, we don't actually expect temperatures always to go up. If you take a longer time period, temperatures are definitely going up.
Ed, can I just ask you...
I'm afraid he chooses his periods, and he shouldn't do that.
Ed, why do you say Nigel Lawson tries to undermine scientific opinion? What do you think his motive is when you say undermining? You suggest there's some sort of ulterior motive.
Well, Nigel will have to answer that.
You answer. You use the verb undermine as though there was some sort of malpractice in disagreeing.
What Nigel does continually, he's done it he does it in a very open way. He writes a good book about it. It's worth the read. I just disagree with most of what's in it. What he does, he puts his argument, but he denies, as far as I can see, the evidence from the international scientific community. And it's not just the international scientific community. The current chief scientist of Britain believes there's a problem. The previous chief scientist in Britain thought there was a huge issue here, and his predecessor did as well. The scientists are telling us we've got to take this seriously.
All right. Now, I'll come back to you, Nigel. Let's just hear from some members of our audience. You, sir, over there.
Wasn't the second part of the question, and what are we going to do about it?
And what are we going to... so what can we do to reduce the risk of further disasters?
Well, all you've done, Berman, is argue about whether it exists, so getting on to the actual doing something about it's going to be slightly more difficult.
Good thinking. Paul Kenny.
Interesting. Throw that one to me. Yeah. Look, can I say? Look, I remember just first part. I remember in the 70s, the scientists were telling us that the ozone layer was being depleted. I remember it. I remember it really well. And everybody went around changing from hairsprays and getting rid of fridges and all sorts of things. So the idea that this has not been a long run-in to where we are now, it frankly is not an honest position. And the acidity of the oceans is rising, it is man-made, and the polar caps are melting. Now, someone didn't leave the fridge door open. I mean, they're absolutely melting. Now, that's what the evidence I see. I don't have the scientific knowledge of other colleagues on the panel, but that's what I see. And so what we need to do about it, this is where the argument comes in about how we have to adapt what energy we use, how we use it. And Nikki's dead right. Actually, a lot of the car manufacturers took the decision to move to much lower car emissions, really low emissions. We now see dual fuel issues. This was because they recognised that this was where the markets were going to be. And that's what we've got to force other people to do. In some senses, it is just good business to lower our carbon emissions. It is good business to actually take the view that there is global warming and adjust our energy use, our types of energy. We've been talking about carbon capture for years. I'm still waiting to see it.
What about adding to fuel bills a bit for development of green and other sources of energy? Are you in favour of that?
I am, actually, but I'm actually more in favour of actually using some of the profits that the energy companies make instead of taking out the pockets of the consumers.
Right. Let me hear from some members of our audience. The person in the blue shirt, right up there on the left first.
Yeah, I think they're all valid points that have been raised. I think the scientific data is such a small window that we've looked at, given how long the planet has been in existence. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm a person who works out on the water. And I think the quickest way we can make an impact in our waters, as we're an island race, we remind ourselves about, stop carrier bags. It's the simplest way forward. There's so many things we can do. All great points raised, but look at pollution. Stop carrier bags in supermarkets. How simple can it be?
OK. And you, sir, in the middle there. Yes.
I think we're slightly missing the point here. I think if you went to the Philippines and asked the people affected by this and say, you know, what's the single most significant thing we could do to perhaps help them survive it, help their family members survive it, they're not going to be saying, you know, carbon tax and climate change. They're going to be saying, help me build a house that's got proper foundations. It's a structural argument as well. So, you know, I think it's a lot more complicated than that.
And a person over there, on the right-hand side.
I think the answer to the question, what can we do about it, really doing things like green levies and so on, I think it's just a drop in the ocean when you compare it to parts of Asia and China and so on, who are having massive more impact on climate change and CO2 emissions.
Nigel Lawson, do you approve of green levies? Do you approve of...
I think the whole policy which Ed Davey is promoting is positively immoral. It's not going to work, fortunately, but it is positively immoral. The gentleman at the halfway towards the back there, who said that what the Philippines people want is to rebuild their country. They want to get richer because they're a poor country that's been exacerbated by the huge increase in population. It's the fastest growing population in the world. What the developing countries, there's not going to be an agreement. Ed is going to go to Warsaw next week to try and get a global agreement. He's not going to get a global agreement.
Not in Warsaw, no. We're not
in Poland. You'll go to Poland.
Yeah, but we're not expecting to get an agreement next week.
No, you're not going to get an agreement. And you won't get one for 2015. And they didn't get one at the Copenhagen conference where they...
But what is the positive...
And I'll tell you why
what is the positive immorality?
I'll tell you what the positive immorality is. That the reason we use... in the world, carbon-based energy, fossil fuels, it is because it's far and away the cheapest form of energy now and will be for the foreseeable future. Not forever. Technology is wonderful. Science is wonderful. But for the foreseeable future, it is. And if you move away from that, you're moving from cheaper energy to more expensive energy. It's causing enough problem in this country. The developing world, China is not going to go by that. Quite right, too. And China is very important. The increase in Chinese emissions in 1 year is bigger than the total emissions from the United Kingdom. So what we do is neither here nor there, unless there is this global agreement.
But the immorality is what?
The immorality is this, is that if you are inhibiting their economic development, by forcing them or persuading them to use expensive energy instead of cheaper energy, which they're not going to do. But if you do, then you are going to condemn hundreds of millions of people in China, in India, in the developing world to premature death, unnecessary disease, poverty, unnecessary poverty, and destitution. That is what you are doing if you get them to do that. It is positively immoral. It is economic growth which will take them off, which will solve the problems in the Philippines and elsewhere, and that means using the cheapest form of energy available.
You're preventing growth in poorer parts of the world, and that is positively immoral.
Well, we're not doing that. What we're saying is the developed world needs to make the biggest cut in carbon emissions, and we need to help the developing countries, the poorer countries, get a cleaner form of development than we've had. And if you go to China, let's take China. China is investing more in low-carbon technology than any other country in the world. It has woken up to the problems of pollution and climate change, and I'll tell you why. I've just been to China. If you go to their big cities, the air pollution in places like Beijing is dramatic. It's appalling. And the Chinese know...
Nothing to do with climate change. Pollution in the air. Nothing whatever to do.
That's not what they think. And what they are doing is they are going to tackle this seriously. They are now talking about building what they call an ecological civilization. They are moving very, very hard and fast on green growth in order to try to change their whole growth model so it doesn't damage the air and the environment and the climate. So you're behind the times, Nigel. If you look at China, you look at other countries, even you look at America. If you look at what Obama is now doing with Secretary Kerry, they are moving fast to try to reduce the carbon emissions from the US. That's why I think we can get a global deal. We desperately need it, and I think we need to make sure that it enables our economies to grow and developing countries to grow too.
In my industry, the Chinese are working on low-emission technology to sell to the rest of the world.
Indeed they are.
It is not actually happening in the remote villages and townships of China.
The Chinese plan is that by 2020, how much do you think of their energy, their electricity will be generated by wind power? Only 5%. That's in their plan. In solar, how much do you think in solar? 1/2 of 1%. They have been building coal-fired power stations.
This is the fossil fuel industry.
They've been building coal-fired... It's not the fossil fuel
industry.
Yes, it is.
You look at the other technology.
You look at the other technologies. They have been taking... keep quiet. They have been building coal-fired power stations at the rate of pretty well one a month for several years, and they're continuing that. These are not being built for decoration, they're being built for use. And that they're doing it. No, this is happening. You've been taken for a ride.
There's a big change happening. There is a big change happening. Let me give you an example of solar, what is extremely exciting. The costs of solar have plummeted in recent years because China is manufacturing solar panels at a massive scale. That is brilliant for villages in sub-Saharan Africa which can't connect to the grid. They're going to have power much cheaper than some of the kerosene fossil fuels that they currently use. They're going to save money and go green, and that's going to be brilliant for the education of the kids and the health of the kids.
Curb your... You can't curb yourself, can you? No. Just, and don't curb your enthusiasm either. Just pause for a moment. The woman here in the front.
I'm a materials scientist. I've been involved in developing materials that move from CFCs to HFAs, which improve carbon... it reduces greenhouse warming within the atmosphere. And I would say that what we really need to look at, whether we've got warming or not, and I do believe it is happening, is that we reduce our need for fossil fuels. Resource efficiency. Nikki will have been developing her car to have light weighting in her vehicle and parts that are efficient, and that's what we should do. We should invest in technology and innovation and do that. And that's what China are doing. They're doing it as fast as we are, because they know that is the way to go.
Sorry, do you agree with Nigel on this, or do you agree, where do you stand?
Unusually for me, I find myself agreeing with Ed for a very simple principle. We've got scarce resources. Why would we encourage profligate use? Actually, whether you think climate change is happening or not. Surely being more efficient with what we've got makes good business sense. And as I say, when the evidence is there that it's 95% likely that climate change is man-made, actually, I want to see Britain being leading in this. I want to see Britain leading because of all the jobs that will come from renewable energies, from all the jobs that will come from that different way of living. I don't just want Nikki to recycle more. I want her to have a different, more sustainable way of living because it's going to be better for our economy and better for Britain. And I'm sorry, Nigel, you're the one who's confused, who thinks that we can carry on as we are now without there being any consequences. Of course there are consequences. And it's not just the people in the Philippines who will feel it. It's the people on the roads in my community who have to deal with high levels of pollution, or the people who don't get the jobs that could come because we're not as efficient, because we're not being able to compete with the Chinese because they've got those technologies.
Right. I would like to hear from one or two more.
That's right.
But we've got to keep doing that, haven't we?
Absolutely.
We've got to keep doing that. We can't pretend that nothing is happening, as Nigel is.
All right, your turn over there.
I was going to say, everyone talks about emissions and industry. Farming accounts for an enormous amount of greenhouse gases. Sheep in New Zealand, cows in America. I remember learning it in geography GCSE. And also, I think it's incredibly arrogant of human beings to think that there's anything that we can do that will destroy the planet. You know, when the planet's had either hope that we do start to make changes fast enough, that we are still here in generations to come. But also, you know, if it goes too far, the planet's just going to have enough and will just say goodbye to us like it did in the past. I can't work out whether you're for cows and sheep or against. Well, yeah, I don't really have a political stance on that.
Who hasn't had a go yet? Now, you've spoken before. Up there, you, sir, with the spectacles on, yes.
Using greater use of renewable energy isn't just the right thing to do as regards climate change. It's also about energy security. So we're not affected by, you know, a new Gulf War cutting off all supplies. And oil prices rose massively a few years ago and then fell, you know, and whereas renewable energy is probably more stable in terms of its cost.
All right, we've got a big audience here. Do any of you side with what Nigel Lawson has been saying about climate change? You do, sir, in the centre there, yes.
I agree totally. If you think at the moment the ice cap in the Antarctic is as big as it's ever been. That's right. And the planet, since the Big Bang, has been going in and out of cold, hot, wet, dry. It does what it does.
We're not the dinosaurs, sir. Do we want to be extinct?
We got no choice. If we want to be extinct, we'll be extinct. If the planet or the sun or whatever takes it will do what it does, and we will have no influence.
So you would take no action on any front?
No, I think all those things that you talk about are great. What we're doing is we're confusing the bigger issue. We can't affect the climate. We can't affect the change. Cleaning up the air is a great idea. Renewables are a great idea. None of that's wrong. It's just that, as the lady pointed out, it's arrogant to think that we can actually do anything to change the world.
If the science is telling us, though, that there's a good possibility that we are responsible, so we could do things that would limit that damage, isn't it the right thing to do? Look at what we can do to do that. It's not just good business, but it's also that 95% risk ratio. Isn't it a good idea that if it is... Because if the science is telling us that we are 95% likely that man is responsible for climate change, so ergo, we can do something about it, why would we not?
And who's a coastal city?
We're a coastal city here in Portsmouth. It's a flat coastal city. Why risk this city?
All right. Well, our hour is up. We started with Portsmouth. We come back to Portsmouth.